Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our Lit Talk. That is Literature Talk. Okay, so in this podcast, we're gonna explore big ideas in literature and we try to connect the literature itself, the story itself, to our life today. I'm with me, Chara Nabila, and in this episode, we're going to talk about a story that is disturbing but powerful and still very relevant. That is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Okay, so have you ever had your feelings dismissed, or you're just being so emotional, or maybe you're just so tired? Imagine that happening so much that you start questioning to your own reality. That's basically what happens to the main character in this story. Okay, so now we have two guesses joining here. Okay, for the guesses, can you please introduce yourself first? Maybe from our first guest.
Hi. Okay, so I'm Rafa Septumarbon and I'm really interested in feminism readings of literature, and The Yellow Wallpaper is one of the stories that made me angry but also made me think a lot.
And hi everyone, my name is Aulia Rahma, and I like to look at how story reflects social condition and history. So this text is fascinating for me too.
Great, thank you so much. I'm very happy to have both of you in here today. So, for anyone listening who hasn't read the story about the Yellow Wallpaper yet, this story was published in 1892 at a time when women had very limited rights and the rescuer was a popular medical treatment. So the main character in the story is a woman who is diagnosed with something like nervous depression after giving birth, and her husband, who is also a doctor, decides that she needs to complete rest and isolation. She is taken into a rented house and kept into a room with a strange yellow wallpaper. As the story goes on, she becomes more and more obsessed with the wallpaper. So maybe let's just start from the patriarchal situation in the story by asking to our guests. So, for my lovely guest in here, after you read the story, so how do you see patriarchy working in this story?
Okay, so for me, patriarchy is everywhere in this story. Like the husband John has all the power. He's a man and he's also a respected doctor. So his opinion is treated as the only truth. He tells the narrator that she is only nervous and that she should stop writing and just rest. He uses his authority as a husband and as a doctor to control every aspect of her life.
Yeah, I agree. The medical system at that time was dominated by men, and women experience were often dismissed as hysteria or oversensitivity. So in the story, the narrator feelings are constantly invalidated. She says she want to see people and maybe change room, but John tell her that he knows what's best for her. It's like her mind and body are not her own anymore.
In a way, the rescuer becomes a tool of patriarchy too, right? It looks like treatment, but actually, it isolates her and makes her weaker because of that.
Exactly. And what makes it worse is that she starts to doubt herself. Like she writes that maybe John is right and maybe she is being unreasonable. And that's how deep the control goes. She internalizes his voices and loses trust in her own perspective.
Okay, if you're listening, try to think. Have you ever seen or heard someone's feelings being dismissed like that? Maybe they stated like they are too emotional. So the story pushes us to question who gets to decide what counts as normal or sick. Okay, so now let's move to the most famous part of the story. the yellow wallpaper itself. At first, it just seemed like an ugly decoration in the room, but then it becomes something more. What does the wallpaper symbolize for you guys?
The wallpaper is a very strong symbol of the narrator situation. Well, she describes it as having a confusion, disturbing patterns that she can stop looking at. And the more time she spent in that room, the more the wallpaper feels alive. To me, the wallpaper represent the social and domestic roles that trap women. The patterns is like the structure is uh patriarchy complicated logically, but very hard to escape.
I see it similarly. Like at night, she starts to see a woman trapped behind the wallpaper, shaking the bars, trying to get out. And that woman behind the wallpaper is like a projection of herself. Like it's her own trapped self, her own desires for freedom. And the more she stares at the wallpaper, the more she identifies with the woman behind it.
Same as well as you guys, that the wallpaper as a prison for her. So it's also interesting that the wallpaper is in the domestic place, a space of a bedroom. So the home is usually described as a safe place, but in this point of the story, this home becomes the cage for her.
Yes, and the fact that it's yellow also adds to the disturbing atmosphere. It's not a calm, natural color. She calls it what we call it repellent and stickly. So it reflects how unhealthy her environment is.
After we try to discuss about this wallpaper, we can conclude that the wallpaper is not just a decoration. It's an active symbol of how she is watched, being controlled, and confined. Okay, so now we move on to talking about the narrator's mental state. So some people read the story as a journey into a madness. Others see it as a realistic reaction to an oppressive situation. How do you guys interpret it about this story on your own opinion?
Okay, for me, I think it's important not to romanticize her breakdown. She clearly suffers a lot, like, but at the same time, I think her so-called madness is also a response to the way she is treated, like she's isolated, she's not allowed to work or write, and her feelings are constantly ignored. Anyone will be affected by that.
Yeah, I agree. And technically, the story is written in the form of her secret journal, so we only see her perspective. This makes her an unreliable narrator, but in a very interesting way, we can see that her perception is changing. She starts seeing movement in the wallpaper, then a woman behind it, then many women outside. The line between reality and imagination is blurred, but that doesn't mean her experience is not valid. In fact, it shows how extreme operation can break someone's sense of self.
Like, is he crazy? Or is he reacting the only way she can to a situation that itself that makes her crazy?
Yes, and I think the text invite us to question the level of a madness itself. Who decided that she is mad? The woman, mostly men in authority, I mean. Meanwhile, her own voice is treated as unreliable from the start.
Story criticism is not only about patriarchy, but also how mental health is defined and handled by the story. Okay, now let's look at the final scene of this story. Imagine this. She's been locked in that room for weeks, and she has been peeling off the wallpaper, trying to free the woman behind it. Finally, she locks the door, throws away the key, and start crawling around that room, following the patterns of the wall. When John finally gets in, he faints, and she just keeps crawling over him. Maybe some readers see this as a kind of victory. Others see it as a pure tragedy. So, what do you think? Where do you guys stand about this opinion?
Well, I see it as both. It's tragic because she has completely lost her connection with reality. She say, "I've got out at last," but she is crawling on the floor. Her mind has broken, but at the same time, there is a strange sense of freedom, and she finally rejects John control and follow her own truth, even if that truth is shaped by her madness.
I slightly disagree. Like, for me, it's more tragic than liberating. Yes, she is no longer controlled by John in that moment, but the cost is extremely high, like her mental breakdown. If we call that liberation, we might ignore that the suffering that led her there. I feel angry at the system that pushed her to that extreme point.
Uh, Wow, the story is so rich. Maybe we can say that the ending forced us to feel uncomfortable. We can't be happy for her, but we also can't ignore that something powerful when she says she's out at last.
And we also see John fainting, which is an interesting reversal. The strong, rational, and doctors become weak, while the sick woman keeps moving, even if in a disturbing ways.
Right, the roles are reversed in a very shocking scene. So now let's bring this to the present. So the story is more than 100 years old. Do you think the yellow wallpaper is still relevant in today? What do you guys think?
Okay, so for me, I think it's very relevant, especially when we talk about mental health and gender. There are still many situations where women are told they are overreacting or too emotional. Even today, some people's mental health problems are minimized or misunderstood, especially if they don't fit the stereotype of a rational person.
Beyond gender, the story also speaks to anyone who has felt unheard by people in power, like doctors, family members, and or institution. When your voice is ignored, you can start to feel invisible or even doubt your own reality. In a sense, the story is sadly very modern.
So if you're listening to us right now, maybe think about this. Are there yellow wallpapers around us? Rules, expectations, or labels that trap people to make their lives smaller? What will it take to tear those patterns down without destroying ourselves in the process? Now we have talked about how the yellow wallpaper shows patriarchy, the medical system, mental health, and symbolism through the wallpaper at the ending. We've seen that the narrative madness in is not just an individual problem, but something shaped by her social environment. If you guys haven't read the full story yet, we really recommend you guys to read this after this episode. Try to pay attention to how the narrator's voice changes from the beginning to the end and how the wallpaper slowly takes over her mind. Okay, now we are ready in our closing. I would say thank you so much to Refa and Alia for joining me today. It was such a pleasure, and I hope someday we can meet again and talk together.
Thank you for having me, Chehra. It was a great discussion with Aulia too.
Yeah, thank you. And I really enjoy it a lot.
And thank you to everyone who is listening to our Lit Talk or Literature Talk. If you have thoughts about the yellow wallpaper or suggestions for another text we should discuss, feel free to share them with us. And we see you in the next episode of our podcast. Bye. Thank you.